All right, here we go. Good morning, everyone. I've started the stream 1 minute early because I was feeling all anxious myself. But we are live and we're waiting for people to trickle in. Yeah, so I've put up some notes here. Please do let me know if you can actually hear me and if you can actually read the text that is on screen. I'm going to wait just a little bit because I said we're starting at 11, and that means I'm not going to say anything important before 11. But if you want to see... Oh, good. We have people saying that they can hear and see the text. Those are two important components, being able to see and hear the video. Okay, excellent. Yeah, I'm very excited to start Let's Make a Language. I'm really looking forward to getting to do this with all of you. I will say, while we're waiting for people to arrive, now that it's 11, if you want to, at any point, give me feedback. I'm looking at the Twitch chat. There's a little bit of a delay. I think we measured it, and it ended up being about 15 seconds. So I won't respond to you instantly, but I do see everything that you put in the chat. If you have longer form feedback for me, my email address is also in the channel description, and I'll mention it again later. So if you want to send me an email with your thoughts, then that's absolutely fine. All right. So, yeah, welcome to the start of Let's Make a Language. I have a brief agenda that I've put up here. I want to stress, though, that this isn't going to be, rigid and pre-formatted. The reason that I'm doing this as a Twitch stream is that I would love your feedback. So if at any point you want to just jump in with questions, or to tell me that I'm going too fast, or anything like that, please just let me know. I really want to do this in collaboration with everyone who's watching. So, okay. Oh, that said, I'll also mention copyright. I'm going to release all of this content under a Creative Commons 4.0 attribution license, which means you can do whatever you want with it, as long as if you directly copy anything from it, you cite where you got it from. Meaning that if you're writing an academic paper, I don't know why you would write an academic paper about me, but if you wanted to, you can, as long as you cite it. And you can use any of the things that I put up on screen or anything like that, again, as long as you say where you got it from. By the same token, anything you put in the chat that I'm going to read aloud, let's say is covered by the same license, so I'm going to read aloud who says what, and you're agreeing to let me put your things on screen by having them in the chat. So, okay, so that's the legal niceties. Yeah, this is incredibly exciting. Okay, so let's start off maybe by talking about what is Let's Make a Language. Why am I doing this, and why are you here watching me? Making languages, creating constructed languages, has been a hobby of mine for a long time now, and it is incredibly fun. It's kind of entered modern thought with Tolkien, who called it a secret vice and famously made up a bunch of conlangs for his various works. But conlanging has actually been around for a very long time, since ancient Greece, at least. We have records of people inventing either like philosophical languages that try to categorize things in terms, like by inventing new words in order to represent things, but also more naturalistic languages, people just making up languages for fun. And that's what I want to share with all of you because I think it's incredibly fun. So Let's Make a Language is my attempt to do that. And I'm going to do streams like this every other Saturday. I'm open to changing that schedule if people feel strongly about it, but that's the plan right now. Going through the process of showing you how I make a language. So I'm going to show you me actually doing research. I'm going to show you how I organize my notes. And together, collaboratively, we're going to make a language. Now, I got into conlanging because I like linguistics and I love dealing with information in that way. I'm a computer programmer by trade, and there's actually a lot of the same skills involved, right? It's thinking about how to represent and communicate information. But that's not the only reason that you might want to get into conlanging. I mean, you might want to get into conlanging because you want to enhance your stories. Like, Tolkien's books are famous not only because of his conlanging, but in large part because he had this incredibly detailed world where, like, every word that he used had a justification, and that really shines through. So maybe you're watching this because you want to make your writing better. Maybe you're watching this because you just want someone to be talking to you while you knit. Maybe you're watching this because you don't know anything about conlanging and you want to see why it's so much fun. So regardless of why we're here, that's what Let's Make a Language is going to try to be about. I'm going to show you how to make a language so that you can take what I'm doing here and adapt it to do your own thing. Okay, great. So that's the first bit of the agenda. Next up, I'm going to talk about actually making a language. And the place that I like to start, there's a bunch of different methods, and I've put some links to the resources both in the channel description, and I'm going to show them on screen. A big one is conlang.org. It's the website of the Language Creation Society. And they have a whole bunch of further resources. People have written books about this stuff if you prefer to read. There are other video series that cover some of the same stuff, but I didn't make them, so clearly they're not as good. So if you want more resources or to see other approaches to language making, you should definitely check out conlang.org and some of the other resources that I've put in the channel description. That said, how I usually structure making a language is to first think about goals for the language. What am I doing? Why am I making this language? Now, I will say the obvious reason that I'm choosing to sit here and do this is because I like languages and I want to make one on camera for you. So that's an obvious goal. But that has there are other subtler goals that kind of fall out of that. Like, for example, the language that I want to make with you, I want to make sure that it's something that we can all pronounce, right? Because I can't spell. That's going to be the beginning of you learning that I cannot spell things on camera, or off camera either. But right, if I'm making a language on stream and I'm trying to engage people and none of us can say the words, that's going to fail. So, okay, so we want to make sure that it's pronounceable. We can get into more about what that means later, but for right now, we're just listing goals. What are we trying to do with this language? The other thing, if I'm making a language on camera, there's different kinds of conlang, right? Like, for example, there's engineered. Yeah, I can't spell anything. There's engineered languages, there's artistic languages, and there's like philosophical languages. And those are making languages for different reasons. So an example of an engineered language that you might know would be something like Esperanto, that was engineered to let people communicate with each other. And because it was designed to do that, it focuses on being easy to learn, on being very regular, and on kind of drawing from a whole bunch of different European languages in order to ensure that there's something that's always familiar to people who already speak at least one European language. And so there's lots of engineered languages like that, like Esperanto, Lojban, etc. And they definitely are interesting, and they definitely serve a purpose. But they're not what I want to do on stream. So what I want to do is actually an artistic language. That is a language that isn't really for actually using in the real world, and not a language either, not a philosophical language that's about trying to change how we think by changing the language we use. An artistic language is all about making a language because language is beautiful, or because you want to incorporate it into an artistic work, or, you know, the point of the language is the language, not what you can do with it per se. So, okay. So one goal for the language is making it pronounceable. Another one is to make it kind of naturalistic. Because if it's going to be an artistic language, yeah, I could make it very regular, but that wouldn't be as interesting, right? And it wouldn't give us as much of a chance to talk about all the interesting things that real life languages do, which is another reason conlanging is so fun. It's a great way to actually learn about linguistics. Speaking of which, I should clarify, I have no professional qualifications to talk about this. I've never gotten a degree in linguistics. I do this purely because it's fun. So I think that I'm worth listening to, but part of what's going to happen on Let's Make a Language is if we come across a grammatical topic that I don't know anything about, I'm going to show you my research process. I'm actually going to research it because I don't know everything about linguistics. So bear that in mind. But I'm getting sidetracked. So making a language on the camera, we want it pronounceable, we want it to be naturalistic. What else is important? Well, one of the other things that I wanted to do with this language is I want to make sure that there's ablaut in it, which is not a word that some of you might be familiar with. Ablaut, and I'm not entirely confident I've spelled it correctly, but I think I know better than my spell checker in this case. Ablaut is when you take vowels in a word and you change them in a systematic way to indicate a change in meaning. And that's a very broad concept, but English does it, for example, and so do a lot. I've got a spelling correction. I do not know better than the spell checker. It is ablaut. Thank you very much, Sparrow of Doom. And I see Sparrow of Doom has said that is there a hashtag you'd like us to use when we mention this cast on social media? That is a great question. I promise I didn't plant it in the audience. No, I hadn't thought about that at all, but I feel like hashtag let's make a language would do pretty well, or if you want a short one, I've abbreviated everything in my notes, LMAL, which, I don't know. Yeah, so if you do end up talking about this on social media, that's what I would recommend, but I didn't think about that at all. So anyway, we've spelled ablaut correctly. I was in the middle of... Oh, right, yes. Ablaut is something that a lot of Germanic languages do, including English. That's why in English we say ride, rode, or, run, ran. It's used by so-called strong verbs in order to indicate the past tense. It's also used to form the past participle in some cases. But that's not the only use of ablaut. Ablaut is used actually by a lot of languages to do different things. But the reason that I'm putting it here in the goals list is because I think that it's cool and pretty to think about vowels in that way, and I think that it's a lot of fun to have words that only differ by vowels. So I'm putting that goal in here purely because I think ablaut is cool and I want to make sure we use it in the language. Which kind of gets to my last goal here. I want to make a language that's fun, and I don't know what that means, but it means that the language shouldn't be tedious, right? It shouldn't be something that's laborious to say, to speak, to work on, because, again, I'm both trying to entertain you and have fun myself. So those are our basic goals for the language. We want it to be pronounceable, naturalistic, I want ablaut in it, and it should be, whatever else it is, it should be fun. At this point, if any of you have things that you want to specifically see me talk about or do with this language, now's a great time to put that in the chat. And I realize I'm pointing at the screens, but you can't see my screens, so if I point at things, just assume I'm pointing at the right things. If you have other goals, now's a great time to put them in the chat, or if you're trying to just follow along with your own language, like your own notes, now's a great time to take a moment and just jot down a few of the things you want to do with your language. Maybe you want to write poetry in it. Maybe you want to just use it in order to name things. Like you don't care about having texts written in your language because who would read them? You just want to be able to name things. Whatever your goals are, just, get out a piece of paper and jot them down. And it doesn't have to be anything fancy at this point. We're just trying to clarify in our own minds why we're doing this. So, those are my goals. I don't see anyone chiming in the chat, so I'm going to assume none of the rest of you have any particular goals, which is great. I love that. So once you know why you're making a language and what you're making the language for, what's the first step? And again, people do this in different orders, but what I like to start with is really phonology, which is part of linguistics, phonology is all about the study of the sounds that go into a language and how those sounds relate to each other. So there's this great resource, ipachart.com, which has a interactive chart of every sound that the International Phonetic Association, I think that's what IPA stands for, probably. IPA chart. It's the International Phonetic Alphabet. It's standardized by the... it's standardized by something. Standardized. There's a standards body that is responsible for this chart. International Phonetic Association. Yeah, and it looks like here's their website. So, right, I've gotten sidetracked. My point is that the International Phonetic Association has put together this chart, which has on it all of the sounds which they judge to be pronounceable by humans. So every sound that I'm making right now is on this chart somewhere, which makes it a great resource for conlanging, because if you're trying to think about what sounds go into your language, if you just use sounds from English, your language is going to sound very Englishy, right? Whereas if you refer to all of the sounds that are possible and you pick ones that sound nice together, your language will sound a lot more different and a lot more itself, rather than just being like a cipher of English. So, okay, I'm going to try something. If I click on one of these sounds, can you hear the sound that it makes?
Sa.
Is that loud enough, or do I need to make the sounds myself because you can't hear that?
Sa.
Yes, okay. I'm told that the sounds are audible, so that's great. Okay, so here's the chart. Let's actually look at sounds. Now, the languages often include kind of whole runs of sounds instead of like just picking from different spots on the chart. And the most common sounds that are present in almost every language are pa, ta, and ka, right? And that's just because... That's just because those languages are so kind of, those sounds are so fundamental, so easy to make, that they just show up everywhere. So regardless of what else we do, we're probably going to have those sounds. Now, the other thing is, when I'm taking notes about my languages, I like to use a modified version of this chart for organizing the sounds, right? So the way that, I didn't even talk about the way this chart is organized. The way this chart is organized is there's separate charts for vowels and consonants. The non-pulmonic consonants are things like clicks, which show up in some languages, but they aren't super common. So I'm going to ignore them. If you want to make a language with clicks, you should definitely read up on non-pulmonic consonants. There's other cool stuff you can do with them. But the most common consonants are these consonants, the pulmonic consonants. And pulmonic here just means with breath, right? From the same Latin root as things like pulmonary. And what that results in is the pulmonic consonants are all of the consonants that you say by forcing air out of your mouth, but stopping it in some way. So like when I say pa, I'm forcing air out of my mouth, but I'm stopping it momentarily at the lips. Pa. And that's why, if you look at the chart, pa shows up under the bilabial stops. That means all of the stops that you make with both of your lips. So that's pa and ba, but there also is ma and bra and fa and va, which don't show up in English, but they're equally valid sounds that you can make with your lips. All of these other places across the top, these are places of articulation, meaning they're where you stop the air in your mouth in order to make the sound. And so, for example, labiodental, that's sounds that you make by touching your teeth to your lip. So when I say something like fa, right? Fa, fa, the way that we say that in English, we touch our teeth to our lips. Dental is exactly what it sounds like. If you put your tongue just against your teeth, like ta, ta, that's a dental stop. Alveolar is just behind your teeth. If you put your tongue like on the little ridge of gum behind your teeth, ta, ta, that's alveolar. Post-alveolar is a little bit behind that, like English ra. If you feel your tongue when you say ra, and the other part that you'll need to know about making languages, by the way, is that you find yourself chanting silly sounds wherever you're sitting. So please, A, feel free to play along at home by making some of these sounds and feeling your tongue. But the other thing is, if you find yourself chanting weird sounds in public, that is totally normal, and I do that whenever I'm starting a language. So, okay, right, getting back to points of articulation, we have things like ra, that's if you feel with your tongue just a little bit back from that ridge of your gum. Then you've got the retroflex consonants, which don't show up in English, and so people have a lot of trouble with them, but they do show up in a lot of Indian languages, in particular Hindi, which means that if you hear someone speak with an Indian accent, they might throw in some of these. So those are sounds like ta and ra, which actually involve curling your tongue back in your mouth. So yeah, those aren't in English, so some people find them a little difficult, but if you want to make a language that sounds very non-Englishy, throwing in some retroflex consonants might be a great way to start. After that, we have palatal, which is like the palate, the soft palate at the top of your mouth, so that would be things like kya, ka. And in English, that's another thing we're going to get back to. English doesn't distinguish between ka made on your soft palate and ka made further back. Some languages do. Some languages don't distinguish, but one of them is like the canonical way you say it. And where languages draw the lines between different sounds is kind of wishy-washy, right? Like we're putting them in a chart so that we can like organize them and keep track of everything. But in the real world, languages will be messier with these sounds. So some languages, as I said, distinguish ka and ka. Some languages don't. Some languages would have different accents, one of which uses one and one of which uses the other. And we're going to talk about accents a good while later. Right now I'm creating like the base language with no accent. And that's not really realistic because actually everyone who speaks a language has a particular accent, but we're going to think about that later. We're going to just pick out the basic consonants and we'll get back to accents when we're talking about different groups of speakers and all that. Right, so then you've got the velar things, that's like ka and ga, kind of at the back of your mouth. Then you've got uvular sounds, which is all the way back like on your uvula, like ka and ga. Which again don't show up in English, and so some people find them a little difficult to make. And then finally you've got pharyngeal and glottal, and I'm not even going to try to make the pharyngeal noises. I'll play some for you though.
Ha, aha, ran, ran.
I find those difficult to make, and they don't show up a lot because there are basically only two sounds that are really used. Oh, I should say, the other thing about this chart, you'll notice some squares are gray and some squares are light green. Gray squares we're pretty sure human mouths cannot make this noise. Green squares without a letter in them, these light green ones, this sound is technically possible, but it doesn't actually show up in different languages. So if you really want to, yes, one of the people in the chat, Adrian, points out that we can't make them yet, but that shouldn't stop you from trying. Grow a new mouth. No, if you do want to throw in some of these light green squares into a language, you definitely can. They're just pretty unusual. So, okay. And then rounding out our places of articulation, there's also glottal, and that's not even using your tongue all the way back in your throat, using your glottis to stop the sound. And that's both things like ha, right, just ha, but also in English we have a glottal stop, which is like if you think of someone with a thick Cockney accent saying bottle, it's the sound in the middle of bottle, but it's not a sound that we're kind of used to thinking of as a letter in English, because it's not a letter, it's a sound. And that gets into the other thing, how languages write these sounds. We're not there yet. We're just talking about the actual sounds in the language, not about how we're going to write them down. And that's the whole thing. You can get amazingly cool writing systems. So, okay, so that's across the top of the chart. And please let me know if I'm going either too quickly or too slowly. But down the side of the chart, we then have what kind of sound it is. Plosives are made when you, like, p a little bit of air, when you're releasing it as a burst. Nasals are when you keep the thing closed and then put air through your nose, like or n. Trills are when you're like, right, like rolling an R in Spanish. Taps or flaps are when you would be trilling, but you only do a single trill, like ra. And that's like the ra in some Scottish accents of English. There's a bunch of languages that actually have this R.
Ra, ara,
That's the wrong sound, I think.
ra, ara.
Okay. So R and L-like sounds are even more liquid, or even more wishy-washy than other consonants, because they can kind of blend into each other, and some R's and L's can sound pretty similar. I'm not totally happy with the sound that this interactive chart makes, but taps, you just tap with your tongue just a little bit. Fricatives, you let air kind of slide past your tongue, like when you say s, there's like a constant hiss of air coming out. Lateral fricatives are when you do the same thing but against the side of your mouth, like if I go cla, that's a sound from Welsh, and it's making sound because I'm pressing my tongue to the side of my mouth and letting air slip past it between my tongue and my cheek. There's also approximants. That's when you get your tongue kind of close but don't quite stop it, and that's things like the American, like ra and ya and ja, right, where you're going yeah, yeah, yeah. And then finally, you've got the same lateral approximants. If you do that same thought of bringing your tongue near the side of your cheek, but you do it with the side of your cheek instead of the top of your mouth, you get lateral approximants like la, la, right? Whew. So, okay, where was I? I was explaining how I organize my notes when I'm thinking about all of these many, many different sounds. And generally, I use a simplified version of this same chart, but I don't need every column and every row, because there's one thing that languages do that that is, they don't include sounds just scattered around the whole chart. They usually have like one entire dimension, like they include this entire column or this entire row. Or not the entire column or row, but like they contain like these columns from these three rows, kind of like a cross-section-y thing. So for our sounds, let's just lay out a basic table. So as I mentioned, p, t, and k are in basically everything, so we're definitely going to have some form of plosives. Actually, let me put it across the top of the chart. Bilabial, dental. Actually, let's just go for dentals. I don't like labiodentals as much. That's a personal thing. And then maybe alveolar, and then velar, if we wanted to be frisky. Okay, and then we are definitely going to have, as I was saying, plosives. So plosives. So pa, definitely going to have that. Ta, definitely going to have that. Ka, definitely going to have that. So the other thing you'll notice, though, it's pa and ba are both bilabial plosives. So like when I say pa and ba, my lips are doing exactly the same thing. What's the actual difference? One of the sounds is voiced and one of the sounds is unvoiced. And so if you actually put your hand on your larynx as you say pa and ba, it'll buzz a little bit for the vowel, but if you feel before the vowel, like if I just say pa and ba, you'll notice that your vocal cords are buzzing for B, but not for P. It's a little bit easier to see with something like sa and za, because you can hold the sound and like really feel it. So if you go s, your larynx doesn't do anything. But if you go zzz, your larynx is buzzing. That's voicing. And the really cool thing is some languages do distinguish it. They treat pa and ba as separate sounds. Some languages, like Mandarin Chinese, don't distinguish it at all, and so they're considered the same sound. So that's another way that our consonants can vary. Let's keep the topic of whether or not we're going to put voicing in this language. Let's put that off for a little bit while we flesh out the rest of this chart, because boy, I've been talking about this chart for like 20 minutes and I haven't written anything down. So okay, so we have PTK. What else are we likely to have? Most languages do have some form of nasal. I'm not sure exactly why. And oh, by the way, when I'm saying these things about like some languages or most languages, one great way to find information about that is to look at the World Atlas of Language Structures, which is available at wals.info. And what they do is they have a bunch of different chapters about different kinds of things that languages can have. For example, we were just talking about consonant inventories. So here we could look at consonant inventories. And it talks a little bit about the different ways that they measure things, and then about how they measure it, and then some additional text. But the other really cool thing is that they will show you, where's the map? You can get a map of what the distribution of different values looks like around the world. So this is a map of which languages natively spoken around the world have different sizes of consonant inventory. That is, how many consonants they have. And you can see there are some that they range all the way from small to large. And the definition for those is back in the chapter, but small usually means, something like Hawaiian, that is just like, ukulele, Hawaiian, hula, right? There's only a few sounds that get put together into kind of longer, more rhythmic words, whereas large would be something like, for example, Georgian, which has a bizarre number of consonants to the point of being kind of unpronounceable. I'm not even going to try a Georgian word. But the cool thing is you can look at where these languages show up over the world and like how common they are, and there's actually a pretty good spread on languages between small consonant inventories and large consonant inventories. So when we're deciding which consonants to include in our chart, in our language, it's worth going back to our goals and thinking about what are we trying to do here. And one of the main goals I said was I want it to be pronounceable. And what that means is I don't want to include really weird sounds like those pharyngeal sounds that no one is going to be able to say. So we're going to probably err more on the side of a smaller consonant inventory just for this language. So we're going to pick sounds that go well together, but we're only going to pick like the basic sounds we need. Still, nasals are pretty common cross-linguistically. So we're definitely going to have ma and na. I can type things, I swear. Okay. So we're definitely going to have ma and na. It's also a big favorite of mine to throw in nga. That's like at the end of English walking, right? Or any other gerund in English, but I really like that sound just because I think it sounds fun. So I'm going to throw that in as well. Now, as I'm doing this, I'm noticing that I haven't put anything in the alveolar column. I put T and N kind of under dental. Let's actually move them over to alveolar, because the reason I had dental and alveolar in there is just I was just trying to make sure that like these were things that were pronounceable, but actually looking at this, I'm not even sure if I want dentals. We'll leave the column here in case we want to come back to this, but for now let's just focus on these because we're trying for a small consonant inventory anyway. So okay, so we've got p, t, k, m, n, ng. What other kinds of sounds? Well, now we're starting to get into sounds that are less common. Not every language is going to have these, but I'm still a big fan of fricatives like sa and za and sha and ja, and even fa and va, right? Because they let you kind of draw things out, that let you be all sibilant. So, okay, so we're going to put in some fricatives. So, again, bilabial fricative, that would be something like va, which, okay, like va is definitely a thing, right? It's definitely a sound that we can make, and there are definitely languages that include it, but it's not so common. And I'm thinking I maybe want to just lean towards f, like f and v from English, not because I'm trying to make this sound very Englishly, but because I think f is a bit easier than v, right? I still have trouble with the bilabials. And part of that is just experience. Anytime you're working with sounds that you haven't heard before, it takes a long time to be able to actually hear them, like, distinct from each other, and a long time to be able to say them, especially, like, consistently. So if you do want to pick a sound that is less common or not in English, absolutely do. Just practice saying it and put it in words so that you're forced to say it when you speak your language. But anyway, so what else are we going to throw in here? So the next up on the list would be th and th, like in the English word the or there. But actually, th and th are not super common. They show up in languages, but they're one of the least common sounds that's included in English. And if I'm trying to make this language non-Englishy, a good way to do that is just to drop them because they're so common in English. So let's just not have th and th in the language. But I think we should have s and z, or at the very least, we haven't talked about voicing yet, because s is also both pretty common and really easy to say, and I like the sound of it. So that one goes in. Now we're looking at velar fricatives, right? And that's things like ra and ra. They show. I'm saying that poorly. Let me try that again. Ra and ra. They show up in languages like Scottish Gaelic, or even in some borrowed English words like loch or bach. So they're not completely unfamiliar, but they're definitely not common in English, right? They're not native to English. But again, I quite like them. And partly that's because, my mother's spoke Scottish Gaelic when I was very little, and I still like the sound of it. But let's go ahead and throw it in. Let's say that let's actually have cha in the language. So okay, so that gives us an okay number of consonants. Now, the other thing that we could do, we could throw in approximates like ra and la and so on. Or we could throw in some of the lateral sounds like tla. I don't know. Lateral sounds makes it because Welsh is like the one big language that I'm familiar with that has lateral fricatives and lateral approximates in it. I'm not a huge fan of Welsh. I don't really want to include many of the lateral sounds, but I do think that we should include some of the approximates because ra and ya, those are fairly common. One interesting thing we could do, though, like English distinguishes ra from la, but a lot of other languages, like Japanese, don't. Ra and la are the same sound, or at least are considered the same sound, and you might choose one or the other depending on the context of the word that you're saying, but still. So what we could do is instead of having like a whole nother row of approximates, we could just go and just put, la and ra in there as the same thing. So that's, and I've also misspelled approximates somehow. Yeah, that's just because my spell checker has no idea how to spell it. Oh, but it's listed over here, so I should just... Yeah, okay, that's spelled correctly. Anyway. So what was I saying? Oh, right. So I don't want any of the lateral sounds, but if we're including like la and ra, should we also include ya? Like maybe there's this thing that some languages do, including Russian, where they have an entire series of consonants that are palatalized. And as you might be able to guess from the name, that means that you actually involve your soft palate in the consonant a little bit. So like take for example the sound ta. If I were to palatalize it, I would raise the back of my tongue a little bit to be closer to the soft palate, and it would make a sound like tia, right? That's why to English speakers, Russian sounds like they have Y's after everything, like in niet. It's not that they're saying n, ya, it's that they're saying nya, right? So some languages have entire runs of palatalized consonants, and I'm also a big fan of palatalized consonants because I feel like saying nya is just fun. Sparrow of Doom points out that Y is so convenient with narrow vowels. That's a great point. We haven't talked about vowels at all yet. I promise I'm getting there. But if you have vowels like I or it's easy to tack a Y on, like E or A. And so that's definitely something to consider. Let's actually do that. Let's do both, because there's no reason not to do both. We haven't really busted our consonant budget yet. Let's put in some palatalized sounds and then also a standalone y that gets used at the ends of words, like on vowels and things. So you'll note that the IPA, because they have so many different consonants, they actually use different characters for some of the sounds. Like this is pronounced y, not ja. Ja is actually a combination of D followed by zh, ja. So they just repurposed the J to mean ya, like in, the way that Scandinavian languages spell things.
Ya, ya.
So that's technically a palatal consonant. I don't want to make this too big for the thing. So if we take the velar approximant, that's kind of just a ya sound, but more further back in your throat, or further back in your mouth, like ya. Let's throw that in there. I'm still gonna write it with a J because we'll say that the real sound is just somewhere between there. Because remember, all of these sounds are kind of wishy-washy, right? And languages will draw the lines in different places. Sparrow of Doom asks, what's a good consonant budget? 12 or so consonants? 20? That's a great question, right? And it answering a question like that, like what should your language do, you really have to refer back to the goals of your language. Like if you're trying to pronounce a very dense, like Germanic, angry sounding language, go wild on the consonants, right? Because they're going to give your language that very kind of crunchy flavor. If you're trying to make like a Liriel Maboodly Doo, right, you can have fewer consonants because it's not contributing as much to the sound of your language. But both of those, it's always a good idea to refer to walls, because if you're ever wondering, like, is this too many consonants? Is this more consonants than any language has? There's a resource where you can find that out. Adrian asks, how many consonants are there in English? I don't know the number off the top of my head. Let's find out. So if we look up English, consonant inventories, it says it has an average number of consonant inventories, which I think the map is conveniently hiding the button for this. Oh, no, wait, that's the comment button. That's not the button I wanted. But if, so they say an average number of consonant inventories. Well, what does that mean? Well, according to the consonant inventories page, described in chapter 1, consonant inventories, they give a definition of all of their categories. Consonants close to this size, 22 plus or minus 3, have been categorized as average. So English has somewhere between 19 and 25 consonants. I don't know the exact number. We can probably find an exact number somewhere, but it also probably varies a little bit by accent. Either way, we're nowhere near 20 consonants yet, right? So even if we go through and we also add palatalized consonants, we're still not going to be anywhere near 20. Grace Alden says, Liriel Mabuludu, International Woman of Mystery, was named by her parents, who are Congolese Tolkien fans. Thank you. So what was I talking about? Palatalized consonants. Palatalized consonants in IPA are written with a little J-looking diacritical mark, which I don't think is included in the international chart. But if you look at like the actual official chart, which by the way get continually updated, so if we look at the diacritics chart, you'll see there's a number of different diacritics that you can put on your sounds in order to indicate what's going on with them. And a palatalized consonant is written with this little superscript J to indicate that it's been palatalized. Now I can type superscripts if I really want to, but I'm just gonna put a J after it because I think that might be a little bit easier to type. And that gets into the concept of romanization, which I'm going to talk about in more detail when we talk about writing systems. But one thing, if you're keeping notes on a computer, if you're keeping notes on a computer, you kind of want to figure out a reasonable way to type your language. If you're keeping notes on like note paper, use whatever you want. Use the IPA with the little diacritics, invent your own writing system, totally fine. But at some point, you're probably going to want to type your language, at which point it does make a certain amount of sense to come up with a way to represent your language using normal characters that you know how to type. And that's why I've stuck to just putting J's here instead of using superscripts. If you want to know how to type some of these more exotic characters on your keyboard, like, for example, how I typed this because if you look, that's slightly, the underline is messing it up, but if you look, that's slightly different from the N, right? The way that I typed that is using a thing on Linux called compose keys, which lets me hit caps lock and then a sequence of keys to type a special character. There are other things like that for different operating systems. If you're using Windows, there's some free software I recommend called WinCompose that does exactly the same thing. If you're using Mac OS, Mac has a lot of these symbols built in. If you hit Option, then you can type symbols on your keyboard, and if you want to know which symbols type which things, you can look in System Preferences, and there's a list. Anyway, so those are palatalized plosives. Can we palatalize other sounds? Like, could we do a palatalized Well, we can absolutely look that up, but the other recourse you have when you're wondering about is a sound possible is just try to make it and see if you can. So if I go mia, 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 yeah, I think I can do that, right? Like, mia. Because I'm still closing my lips to make the sound, but then as I am like releasing back to say the consonant, to say the vowel, I'm like letting my tongue drop from the roof of my mouth, like nya, and that seems fine, so let's throw that in. Similarly, can I say nya? Well, yeah, of course I can say nya. That's present in Russian, as I mentioned before. Now, can you say nya? I think that one's a lot trickier, or maybe just because when you say your tongue has to be pressed back to touch like the back of your mouth, which means that it can't really be up near the palate to make that sound as it comes down. So I'm not gonna palatalize nga. Now you're saying, why could I palatalize kya if I'm not palatalizing nga? Well, it's because if you say ka, Grace tells us that a palatalized nga is indeed possible and that she just did it. So that's good to know. Let me try. Nga, nya, nya, nga, nya, nya. This might just be a me problem, but I'm having a little bit of trouble hearing the difference between a normal palatalized N, like nya, and a palatalized nga, like nya, nya. It's probably totally possible, and Grace says it kind of rolls back to front. Yeah, yeah. Okay, I can see that. I'm still not going to put it down because it's a sound that I have trouble with, and I'm going to have to say these sounds a lot on camera. So I'm going to skip that one. Similarly, I'm going to skip palatalizing any of the fricatives because that's a little bit trickier, right? If you just hold a fricative like s, when you release from that fricative, you can do all sorts of things with your tongue. Like you could say xia, right? And that would be a palatalized S. Actually, I have just explained this. Why don't I just do that? Yeah, okay, so if we throw in fia and xia and xia, I don't know, I'm still having trouble with that one. So we might come back to it. The other thing to remember here is that your language is done when you say it's done, which means that we're not having to like make this choice about these sounds once and for all and then stick to it for the rest of time. We're trying a bundle of sounds. And if we get to the next part of this exercise, which is actually like making the rules for how these sounds go together, and it turns out that some of these sounds just aren't working or there's obvious gaps, we can come back and change this, right? So, okay. So how many consonants does that leave us with? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18. Okay, so that's 18. So that would be, according to Walls, moderately small. It's just a little smidgen under the average number of consonants. If we wanted to include more consonants, one easy set of things is we could introduce the voiced consonants, like ba and bia. Grace says, I love the palatalizations, but it does make this model language less pronounceable for English speakers if that's what your pronounceable goal was. So yes, that's what my pronounceable goal was, because I assume most of the people watching this probably speak English for obvious reasons. And I do want to make sure that people can follow along and say words and things at home, because I know when I watch things like this, I find myself just mumbling nonsense words. So, okay. So that is one of my goals. But I was okay with including palatalization because it's not that weird. Like, that's why I didn't include the palatalized ng. But these others, if an English speaker just said the sound followed by a ya, that'd be okay, right? Like, if you say the Russian word niet, it might sound weird to English speakers, but I don't think you really have to explain to them how to say it. Whereas if I were to include, like, retroflex ra, you'd have to explain how to say that, and it wouldn't be natural or normal. Whereas I think niet and, like, tiel and even, like, fink, right? It sounds weird, but I don't think it's impossible to say. Let me know what you think in the chat. If you please try saying these sounds, and if there's any of them that you can't say, let me know, because I do want to make sure that you can follow along. Where was I going with this? Oh, right. So while I wait for all of your complaints about the consonants to roll in, we've got enough consonants. If we wanted more consonants, we could introduce voicing, right, and have like both pa and ba be sounds. But we don't really need to. Let's see where this goes. Let's try it without the voicing, and then if it sounds weird and we want to add them back in, it'll be easy to add them back in. So okay, so that's consonants. So that's, we're done with the sounds, right? No, because there's also vowels. And vowels are even more wishy-washy than the consonants. So this is the vowel chart. And the reason it is drawn kind of on a slant like that is because it's supposed to mimic the shape of the inside of your mouth, because these vowels are arranged on the chart where, thank you, Grace says the vowels are not what they seem. True. The vowels are pronounced on the chart approximately where they are pronounced in your mouth. So for example, if I say eh, right, I pronounce that kind of very forward and high, eh. And that's, or like if I say I, that's forward but back. I. No, sorry, not forward but back. High but back. And if you've ever heard someone talk about high vowels versus low vowels, or front vowels versus back vowels, this chart is a great way to see how that works, right? Like, so like, is a front vowel, but o is a back vowel. So vowels. Remember how I mentioned ablaut about 50 minutes ago? Ablaut being a regularized change in vowels to indicate something. Well, clearly that means that we need vowels. And we could do it just by like saying, okay, I like the sound of changing this vowel to that vowel. That would work. But the way that most languages that do something like that happen is that they have a particular direction that ablaut goes. So, for example, English like flip-flop, that's front to back, or tic-tac-toe, that's front, middle, back. So in English, whenever we have a sequence of things, we tend to go front to back, or even like ride, rode. Run, ran is, I think, a little bit contrary to that, but you're going to have weird words in every language. The point is that English vowels tend to go front to back. But that's obviously not the only way that they could go, right? Like you could go from high to low instead. You could go I, e, a, and I, o, if you wanted to, right? You could also do something a little more complex, like maybe you go both back and down, like I, a, I, a. And that would be perfectly reasonable. Or obviously you can go the other direction, I. So if we're going to use vowel change in the language, we need to think about which direction we want it to go and which vowels we want to distinguish. English is really unusual for the number of vowels that it has. And it may not seem like we have a lot. You might think we have just 5, but that's not really true, because we have this thing we call stress, where there are stressed and unstressed vowels, and some vowels change depending on what consonants are near them. And like, think about the difference between dig, dug, dog, deg, dreg, drag, drop, right? Can that be a poetry technique, moving the vowel location in a pattern like that? That's Sparrow of Doom asks that in the chat. Yes, it absolutely can be. I mean, that's why we say flip-flop and not flop-flip, because it sounds better. And if you have a poem where you have a sequence of very similar words, if you make them follow that natural front-to-back order, it will sound better. Like drip, drop, the droplet went. Right, as opposed to drop, drip. It sounds weird. So, okay. What was I saying? Who knows? Oh, right, I was talking about vowel systems. English has too many vowels. They're not all used in all words, but there are a bizarre number of English vowels. And because vowels in general are so indistinct where you draw the line, it can be kind of hard to say this is exactly how many vowels English has, especially when you get accents taken into account. Because one of the main things that distinguishes English accents is what they do to the vowels. Which means that English is not something I'm going to follow for the vowels, because that would make something that sounds very, very Englishy, just because English has too many vowels. The more common vowel systems that you'll see cross-linguistically are the 3-vowel and the 5-vowel system. Those are the most common systems. Obviously, there are languages that use any number of different vowels. The 3-vowel system is usually something like I, e, a, but not always, right? There are other languages, I think, that do I, e, o. The 5-vowel system you might be familiar with from Spanish, for example. That's the like a, e, I, o, u. But there are other languages that augment that with a 6th vowel, like a, e, I, o, u, a. Yeah, and ultimately this is very much up to personal taste. For this language, I think that I'm probably going to pick to have more vowels because we have fewer consonants, and that'll produce like a more nice sounding vocalic language without a lot of repetition. So I might choose to go with the 5 vowel a, e, I, o, u system, but we don't necessarily need to do that because this chart is actually only showing part of the picture. And hold on just a minute, I need to check my camera's battery because it's been an hour. Oh, but the battery is holding just fine, so okay. So this chart is only telling part of the picture because high and frontness is only part of what actually determines what a vowel sounds like. There's other components, like the reason that there's these 2 sounds clustered close together is due to something called rounding. So if I say I, my lips aren't rounded at all. If I say I, that's the same point in my mouth, I'm just rounding my lips. And again, English makes lots of use of both rounded and unrounded vowels. Unrounded vowels tend to be high vowels, and rounded vowels tend to be low vowels, but that's not a hard and fast rule. You can have both unrounded and rounded vowels from anywhere. Sparrow says, can we please throw in a cool non-English vowel? Yeah, absolutely. Let's think about what we could throw in. There's a bunch of cool sounds like ah is present in English but is less common. Let's see, there's a sound I'm thinking of that's in German. Grace says, ooh, vary the vowel length. Yes, that is exactly what I was working my way up to, is that's another way to change change vowels, is you can vary how long you say the vowels. And that's something that's present in a lot of Scandinavian languages as well as in Scottish Gaelic. And that's the difference between, fire and fire. English uses vowel length sometimes to indicate stress or sarcasm, but it can be used to actually distinguish words. It's a perfectly cromulent way to change vowels. So good point. Let's see though. This is the sound I was thinking of. There's a sound that's in German, which is a cool vowel, which is not super common, and that, I don't know if you can hear this very well. That's an unrounded back closed mid vowel, meaning that it's like, it would be like O, but you don't round your lips. So yeah, if we want to throw in a non-English vowel to please Sparrow, we could totally throw that in. And if we did that, then we might end up with something like I, E, O, U, A, A, or we might just throw out O entirely, because we could go with all unrounded. That wouldn't really be naturalistic. Most languages include some rounded and some non-rounded. But I, E, A is a little bit rounded, but A isn't. So we could go for all unrounded, or we could meet our vowel quota by having the rounded and unrounded forms of each of those 4, like I, E, A, and A, and A. Sorry. It's not English, difficult to pronounce. I, That wouldn't be so bad. So yeah, let's see what that would look like. That would give us 8 vowels. I don't know if I've actually set up my computer to type. Yes, I have. Okay, good. I don't think I've set my computer up to type this one, though, and I don't know how I would. So let me just copy and paste that into the document. Right, so we could go with that set of vowels. That's 8 vowels, which is a little bit large, but not at all out of the realm of possibility, and it gives us this really nice set of vowels, right? Like you've got your rounded vowels and your unrounded vowels, and that would be a natural way for ablaut to change things, because we might go like let's make up a word with some of the sounds that we have so that we can actually hear what it sounds like. So if we picked something like, xia, si, king, right? Si king, that's a word. If we went and we transformed that to xue kung, si king, xue kung, right? That's, you can hear how those words are clearly related, but they're different. So that would be one great way for ablaut to work, would be to shift between rounded and unrounded, depending on what's going on. The other thing that you'll see in languages that have vowels like this is you'll see something called vowel harmony, which is, you can also have consonant harmony, although that's a lot less common, but vowel harmony is actually really cool. That's when vowels that are near each other influence each other. So for example, there's some languages that have very strict vowel harmony, where every vowel in the word must be the same vowel. But there's also languages that have more gentle vowel harmony, like where a word must either be all rounded or all unrounded. It's not permitted to mix them. If we're going to be using the rounded versus unrounded distinction to do our ablaut, it might make sense to have that form of vowel harmony for our language, where we say a word is either all unrounded or all rounded. Sparrow says, I like that shift. Good, so do I. I'm gonna say, let's do that. Let's commit to it. I was planning on doing something with vowel length, which I know would please Grace, but let's embrace these vowels and just run with it. So in that case, let me reorganize these vowels a little bit, because now we've got and I still don't know how to type that character, but I'll figure it out between sessions if we need to. So now we've got essentially 2 sets of 4 vowels each, and a word picks which set and then has vowels within the set. So okay, that's great. I'll make a little note to myself. Speaking of notes, by the way, in between sessions, I'm going to tidy these up and then post that session's notes on my website. The link to my website is in the channel description. You shouldn't need to worry too much about tidying up the notes. I mean, you're gonna keep seeing them on screen. We're gonna keep looking at them, so you're not gonna miss anything. But if you find yourself wanting to refer to them, I'll make sure that they're posted so that you can do that. Okay, so great. So that gives us a reasonable vowel system. It's a little unusual, but it sounds good. So let's go for it and see if it still makes sense. You might think that, okay, now we've chosen the vowels and chosen the consonants. Clearly, we're now done with phonology and can move on to something interesting like grammar. But you would be wrong, or rather, you would be me like 4 years ago before I really understood how much morphology actually influences the sound of a language, because it's true, you can just throw these sounds together in like sound soup and it will work. You will be able to say those words, but they won't flow as well. And that's because different languages have different rules for what sounds can go near each other, for what sounds can touch, for how syllables are shaped. And that actually makes a big difference in the sound of the language. So, like, for example, some languages just do some consonant followed by some vowel. Like, for example, Babylonian is always one consonant, one vowel. Like, ba, lo, ni, an. The an is actually not from Babylonian. That's a prefix or a suffix that was added later. But the root word, the Babyloni, follows that pattern of consonant vowel. So we could do something very strict like that. Mandarin Chinese does something only a little bit less relaxed than that. They'll do consonant vowel, and then you can end your syllable with an n or a w or some other sounds that I'm probably forgetting. So like that's where you get words like pinyin or, matoro, right? That's like just a little bit more flexible. Then you have languages that will go like consonant, vowel, and then any fricative, like, pass, paf, right? And then you've got languages that will get even more complicated. Like English permits something completely ridiculous because it's a mongrel language, but it has a syllable pattern that's something like this. Like you can have multiple consonants both before and after the vowel. Like think about the word strength. That's st, and then the vowel, g, f. Right, so we've got 3 consonants both before and after the vowel. And there are other English words that will have 2 vowels in the same syllable. Those are called diphthongs. I will have an example as soon as I stop talking about this. Like giant, right? That's the I and the A there. They kind of merge into one smooth moving vowel sound. Aya. So right, there's a spectrum here of languages all the way from Babylonian that does, ba ma la ta wa, all the way through to English. Sparrow asks, how long are we going today? Shall I make a sandwich now? I can't answer about the sandwich. I think that depends on how hungry you are. I was planning to broadcast in 2-hour chunks because A, Twitch encourages you not to do little short streams, and B, 2 hours is enough to really get into a topic thoroughly, but not, I hope, so long that I exhaust you. If you want me to go for longer or less long, put that feedback in the chat or email it to me, because I really do care about making sure that this is enjoyable for you. And I recognize you maybe did not sign up for a 2-hour lecture on linguistics. But that was my plan. So I'm going to keep going for another 50 minutes or so, but if we find a natural wrapping up point earlier than that, we'll wrap up there. And if you want longer or shorter sessions, just let me know. Okay, so we've got the spectrum. And where do we want our language to fall on this spectrum? Well, that's another tricky one, right? Because as English speakers, things like strength, they feel very natural, right? Like they don't seem as though they're difficult to pronounce. But if you look at something, again, I'm going to pick on Georgian because Georgian is a amazingly consonant-full language. Let me actually look it up. If you look on Wikipedia A, they've got an amazingly beautiful alphabet. But B, if you take a look at their consonants, these are all of the consonants that they distinguish. This is too many consonants. You'll see that Georgian distinguishes both voicedness, and they have aspirated, voiced, and ejected affricates. They have affricates, which is a whole category that we didn't even talk about, which is when a plosive and a fricative get together and mesh into one another, like tsa. They have a whole bunch of consonants. I think this is too many consonants. And if you look at Georgian words, even though they have a bunch of consonants, they're not separated by very many vowels. Like, let's see if this is a good example. Tskovreba. Okay, that one's fairly pronounceable. But like gvprtskvni, right? Gvprtskvni. That is pronounceable. I just said it, probably in a horrible accent. So please, if you know Georgian, don't mock me for my pronunciation. But the point there is, Georgian is perfectly willing to jam together, like, what is that, 6 consonants? Because this counts as a single consonant for their purposes. 6 consonants, which is, to say it lightly, not something I'm going to try to put you through. So, okay. As English speakers, we might be inclined to go for something Englishy like, but by looking at Georgian, we can see how difficult pronouncing more consonants in a row than your native language is. So unless I'm specifically going for that kind of, dark, guttural, orcish sound where there's lots of consonants that you spit at people, unless I'm going for that, I tend to try to err on the side of fewer consonant clusters, because everyone can pronounce fewer consonant clusters. Some people have trouble with more consonant clusters. And also having fewer consonant clusters lets you kind of be exhaustive about your rules for how consonants interact with each other. Because the other thing is, we have both these palatalized and these non-palatalized consonants, but it's not impossible, you can definitely do it. It's a little bit more difficult to say a palatalized consonant followed by a non-palatalized one. So if I said nya, f, a, nyafa, that was totally possible. But fnya is a little bit easier. Fnya, fnya. I like the sound of that. So one thing that we might consider doing is we might say, okay, well maybe our syllable pattern will be something like any consonant that is not palatalized. So let's use a T for that. We might say any consonant that's not palatalized, any consonant including palatalized consonants, and then any vowel, and then maybe a trailing N. Right, that would be an entirely reasonable pattern. Oh, by the way, I should say this whole study of how different consonants interact with each other and how they actually shape words, that's called phonotactics. If you ever want to look it up, it's right here, phonotactics. So if you ever want to look up how sounds that are next to each other influence each other, that's your search term. So we could go with a syllable pattern kind of like this. That would be fine. That would mean that in the middle of words, we're anything that we put at the end of a syllable could be up against things at the beginning of syllables, but I don't think that's a big deal. Whenever I'm doing something like this, I always try to come up with a reasonable syllable pattern and then try making some words using those syllables to see whether it actually sounds how I want the language to sound. So let's make up a word. Let's say we did, M, and then a palatalized T, and then a rounded U, and then an N. So that's one syllable. And that would be mtune, mtune. That's okay. And then since we're going to be doing ablaut, let's see what that would be like with the unrounded version. That would be mtine, mtine, mtune, mtine. Yeah, okay, so that's reasonable. That mt, that's not something that happens in English. Some authors, when they're trying to invent words that they want to sound non-English, will just break English's phonotactics rules, because even though English lets a bunch of consonant clusters happen, there are still rules for phonotactics in English. Right? So if you have a word like mlatu or kzinti, those don't sound like English words, and that's because they break the phonotactics rules. Mlatu is from Lojban. It doesn't sound like an English word, whereas matu, that doesn't either. But both matu and latu, they sound like they could be English words, right? Like latu, latte, it's the same thing. But mlatu, definitely not an English word. Still easily pronounceable, it just sounds different. And so you'll see writers who just try to make up foreign-sounding words by doing that, and that works up to a point. But the whole reason we're doing a conlang instead of just slamming sounds together is because there is a deeper structure to languages, and knowing that and working with it is a great way to make your poetry in your invented language, or your names in your invented language. It's a great way to make it a little bit more interesting and more consistent. So so that's one example. Let's keep making up some syllables to make sure that we're on the right track. What if we did, as pass, 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 pass. Yeah, that's actually pretty easy. Pass. I intended this to show that the is harder to pronounce before other consonants, but I'm not convinced that's a big deal. Let me know in the chat whether or not you can pronounce these, and therefore whether or not you want to disallow any particular combination here. Really, really into CrossFit says, what is my favorite fictional language? That is a great question. Whew, and one that I hadn't thought about. So obviously I have a huge, well, maybe not obviously, I have a huge soft spot for Lojban, which is an engineered language. It's, here, let me, I've, this whole time I've had you in a single camera view. I took the, oh no, it didn't do that. Never mind. I theoretically set up my broadcasting software so that I could switch to like a monologue where my face would take up the whole screen, but apparently that's not working. I'll get that working for next time. You'll just have to settle for me monologuing down in the corners of your screens. Obviously, I really like Lojban, and that's great, but that's not really a fictional language. So favorite fictional language, obviously I have a big soft spot for Tolkien's languages because, you know, my mother is very into Tolkien. My other mother read me the books when I was little, and he's one of the first conlangers, and he's produced really detailed notes, but there's still some things that I'm not as on board with. Actually, the language that, my favorite fictional language, I think, is probably actually Dothraki. And that's not because I like the Game of Thrones books. I actually haven't read them, but I have heard that they're kind of grimdark, and I don't tend to like that. But the reason that I like Dothraki is because the language inventor was George R.R. Martin had come up with a few words that in Dothraki that were already in published books. But then later, when they were doing the TV series, they wanted longer segments in Dothraki and the other languages too, like High Valyrian and so on. And so, you know, they wanted longer samples, but George R.R. Martin was not a conlanger. He just put random words in his books. And so they hired a professional conlanger whose name is skipping my mind. And he's like the one professional conlanger. There's not exactly one, but there's only a very few of them because it's kind of a very niche thing to do. But they hired him to extrapolate a language from these few existing words. And that's really cool. It's kind of a different approach to what we're doing here. And it's really cool because he's actually released a good number of his notes on how he did that, which means that you can read about how, Grace says Mark Okrent. I don't think it was Mark Okrent. Let me see what the internet said. Who was the creator of Dothraki? David Peterson, that's the guy. David Peterson, I think, also did the language for Avatar, not the comic, the blue people in space one. But yeah, really, really into CrossFit says that's awesome. Yes, it is awesome, and I highly encourage you to go look at some of the stuff that he's written about language creation because it's really interesting. Okay. So, what was I talking about? This is the other. You're gonna have to get used to both me misspelling things on camera and me getting completely distracted when I'm pulled off on a tangent, which is great. I love it. Please pull me off on tangents because that's more fun for everyone involved. That said, we definitely want to come up here with a few phonotactics rules because otherwise we're just going to end up with consonants all jammed together and it's going to feel very messy. So, I don't know. We could say something like, you know, only occurs at the ends of syllables, or maybe you want to say like ra only occurs at the end of syllables or at the beginning of syllables, but like here's where we start getting into kind of more judgment-based stuff, because here it's about what sounds nice, right? Like if I say, like, sich versus sich, yeah, that's pronounceable. But whether we allow that or whether we restrict it to things like gis versus gis, it changes how the language sounds. So, okay, looking at this, I actually quite liked sich, and I didn't quite like gis as much. So maybe let's say for our syllable pattern, let's allow some like the f, s, and let's permit those at the end, but maybe not. Let's call this category. If my notes are unclear, please let me know. I'm just keeping track of these so that I can like keep the pattern in my head. So T was for non-palatalized stuff, and I've just made D everything except like so that means that wouldn't be a permitted syllable, but we could also have stuff like one obvious stupid thing we could do is if we tried to do like this, like fya, that doesn't, like, you can't really hear the separate F's there. So one really common thing that many languages do is there are some sounds which, if they would end up butting up against each other because of grammar rules or whatever, you just rewrite them in some way. And in particular, I think if we have like f and then f, those should probably just turn into one fya. Whereas if we had fyafa, that I think is its own thing, like fya, fa, fya, fa, fya, There's kind of a vowel that's creeping in here, right? Like there's kind of if I say fya, fa, there's like an that's creeping in there. So maybe we don't want to permit that either. So maybe our phonotactics rules would look something like fricatives can't touch, right? Because that would rule out things like fsia, which could be okay, but I like that. Let's go with that for now, and then if we find ourselves needing to revise that, we'll come back, because that's the other thing. This isn't written in stone, right? We can come back and change this at any point. So okay, so if fricatives don't touch, but otherwise we do these things, let's also throw in as something that can end a syllable, because that's very common. And let's also, and I'm also going to say, this initial non-palatalized consonant, let's make that optional. And similarly, let's make the thing ending the syllable optional. And so that gives us a nice flexible structure to our syllables, right? Most of the words that we would come up with, we could still say, and they would still fit these rules, but there are rules, right? We know some things aren't permitted, right? So like you're never going to have a palatalized sound followed by a non-palatalized sound. You're never going to have more than 3 consonants in a cluster. You're never going to have 3 consonants in a cluster where the first consonant isn't a nasal or a fricative, that sort of thing. So okay. So let's go with this and kind of roll with it. Whew. I'll be frank, that was... Oh, Grace asks, is there a web app or some such which, given a phonological set and a rule set in the syntax you're using, will generate a bunch of words? That's an amazing question. Yes, there is. And that's actually where I first learned this syntax. If you take a look at zompist.com's language construction kit, it's a book. If you prefer to purchase and read physical books, you can purchase it. It's by Mark Rosenfelder. It's a great introduction to language creation. It's where I actually got my start conlanging. But if you go to zompist.com, there's a bunch of helpful stuff. both about his languages and about actual like tools for making languages. I'm trying to remember where the tool I'm thinking of is linked. It's the Zompist word generator. Yeah. Here it is. So this is a pretty helpful little application. You give it categories, right, where capital letters stand for a list of letters. Then you can give it rewrite rules. That's how you would express the phonotactics rules. So you might have a rewrite rule like, F followed by FJ rewrites into FJ. And then you'd list out the different syllable patterns. And so you could say something, we would say something like TDV and or DVN or TDV or DV. And then we would have to define those categories and so on. And then there's also some options that you can use to tune the output. And it gives you a whole bunch of words. And because I didn't put things in the proper format, it's given me nonsense. But yeah, it's a quite useful tool. And there's also a bunch of other little tools on this website that are still pretty useful. Grace says, that is awesome. Thank you. Yeah, you're welcome. Like the phonology builder that I mentioned is a way to try to put together those categories if you want help building them. And there's also a sound change applier where you give it those categories and then you can specify a list of sound changes that you want to make. And that's great for a few different things, right? If you've got a grammatical thing that changes sounds like ablaut or something that changes consonants, you can express that with sound changes. Or if you've got an older form of your language and you want to try to derive a newer form, you can also do this and put in sound changes. That later technique of coming up with an older version of the language and then changing it gradually over time to become a newer version of the language, that's a really powerful technique that lets you really both experiment with language change but also kind of smooth over any rough edges. So like if you pour your heart and soul into a conlang and you really want to use it, but you have now learned enough that you can see that there are some rough edges, leave it. Make it the old version of language. Make it like Old High Germanic and then derive modern German from it by applying a sequence of sound changes and grammar changes that sand off the rough edges. That's a really fun thing to do. And when we get, I want to talk about that. I wasn't planning on talking about it yet. I was planning on talking about it later. There are certain sound changes that are common in different scenarios. So if you know stuff about like what's happening to the people who speak your language, you can actually figure out what sound changes would probably happen and then use those. So that's pretty cool. What was I in the middle of? Oh, no, I don't think I was in the middle of anything. I think I was in the middle of saying that's everything that I really planned to cover today. I really just wanted to talk about goals for our language and then about the phonology and including the phonotactics. So really at this point, I don't want to move on to talking about writing systems and grammar until next time. Grammar is a lot of fun, and I'm going to have a lot of fun with it. But it's also a very big topic, and I don't want to start that when we only have maybe 30 minutes left. So my plan is if you have any more questions, feel free to throw them in the chat. I'm going to sit here and make up more sounds and more words to see how these sounds are working together. And I'll take suggestions too. If you put suggestions for words in the chat, and then as we make them, try saying them, see if they sound right. And if they don't sound right, then let me know and we'll try modifying the phonology until things sound right. If you were just in this for talking about the linguistics and you're not up for a half hour of chanting weird words, then, feel free to go, do your taxes and eat lunch and all that. But I'm gonna make up words for a while. So words. Well, actually, while we're here, let's actually use the word generator. Might as well show how it works, and that's a little bit easier than making up things. One thing to be aware of, though, the word generator is a little bit limited. It thinks that every single character is a single letter, or every single letter is a single sound. So if we tried to add something like the way that I've been writing the palatalized consonants, that wouldn't go so well. So one thing that you can do is you can add a letter that you don't plan on using, like capital letters, and then use a rewrite rule to rewrite it to what it's actually supposed to be. So let's actually go through and set up these categories. So the categories we're using are T, D, V, and N. So let's try T is everything that's not palatalized. So that's going to be pa, ta, ka, ma, na, nga, fa, sa, cha, la, and ya. Okay, and then D is everything except cha. So let's try that. So that's going to be P. I'm going to use that capitals trick for the palatalized letters. Grace says, since palatalization is so common in this language, you could denote it with capitalization, or vice versa. You could, yes, you absolutely could. I'm stuck on the or vice versa. That's an interesting thought. You absolutely could denote it with capital letters, and that's, for example, something that Klingon did. Klingon ran out of letters because they had so many sounds, and so they just started using capital letters. It does work. It's a totally reasonable thing to do. It is a little bit harder to read. So obviously this language that we're making. Oh, I realized I didn't talk about any of the background that I made up for this language. When I make a language, I like to have in mind who I'm making it for, who speaks it, what are they doing, and I've made myself some notes on a little isolated mountain village in a world that I'm writing some stories in that speaks the language. So I didn't even talk about that, but they have their own writing system, right? And so when I'm writing these things using the Latin alphabet, that's not really how things are written. And I was planning on talking about writing systems a little bit later, but writing systems can really influence how you handle things in your language, because, for example, if you have a language that doesn't write vowels, that uses an abjad, for example, Hebrew, well, that makes vowels a lot harder, right? And means that vowels will change more and be less meaningful because they're not written down. And they can still be meaningful, but sometimes that'll cause ambiguities in your writing. Or if you've got a language like Chinese, like Mandarin Chinese or Cantonese, that uses syllables, like ideograms for whole words or whole syllables, well, that obviously causes also very different things, because now, your unit's going to be the word, and so you're not going to have as many suffixes because they'll be hard to write. Or if your language is something like Japanese that just grabs up all the different writing systems that it comes in contact with, writing it will be very different, and how you write something can have a big impact on how you're perceived and how formal you're being and so on. So writing system is absolutely a big deal. But because I'm typing things on a computer, I wanted to use the Latin alphabet. And using the Latin alphabet to represent a language that doesn't natively use it is called romanization. And what romanization you pick is really important, because so there's actually a really good example in the language construction kit, in their section on writing, where they talk about where they talk about writing systems, and they talk about romanizations, and they give an example. Let me find it. They give an example about the same word written with two different writing systems that look very different. Here it is. Darkane, Darkan, and Daharkan, and Darkan are not pronounced very differently, but the differing orthographies give them a different feeling. And depending on what you're doing with your language, you might want a different feel. So Anyway, all this to say, yes, you can absolutely use capital letters for things. I'm not going to, because I think it makes it a little bit harder. Oh, and I mistyped this and no one let me know. Shame on you. There we go. I think it's a little bit harder to read, and it's also a little harder to keep track of. That said, for your writing system, do whatever you'd like. Like, in the real writing system for this language, not in the romanization, maybe palatalization could be integrated with a diacritic mark, right? That would be cool. Yeah, either way. So okay, so I've got, and then F, and then F, and then L, and then, and I just realized that I did not include any of the palatalized consonants in here, so let's correct that. Okay. It's Pika Pika says, yo, what the heck here? I'm learning Python, still a noob, and you making a new language. Yeah, I'm so excited that you could join us. It's, I hope, been fun, and I hope that you see why I like conlanging so much. B, Python, I'm fairly sure you're joking, but just to be clear, Python is a programming language. Programming languages are very different from conlangs because conlangs are usually inventing like new grammatical structures and new words to represent things, whereas programming languages are more about communicating efficiently to a computer, and that those two tasks, they just demand very different things. But that said, when the creators of Lojban, back when it was called Loglan, when they were actually creating the language, they wanted it to be sufficiently regular and logical that it could be spoken both by humans and computers, which nowadays seems, a little bit quaint. But if you read like The Moon is a Harsh Mistress by Robert Heinlein, they actually speak Loglan to the computers, because at the time, Robert Heinlein thought that was the future of logical communication, was Loglan. So there's definitely an intersection between conlanging and computer languages, but actually implementing a programming language is a very different thing, which I also want to do a series on. I'm just going to do that after finishing this one, so who knows when that's going to be. Anyway, where was I was making categories. Okay, so, and then let's also put in the N category, which is these things, and then finally the vowels, which are which are those things plus this character, which I still, actually, is that still on my clipboard? Ha, yes it is. Okay. It's Pika Pika says, Loglang, I've definitely seen it, but I had no idea what it is. There you go. The modern version of it is called Lojban. And if you're looking to learn a weird language to impress your friends with, Lojban's not a bad choice. It was designed as an international auxiliary language, meaning that it was designed for people to speak, like in order to facilitate international communication. And it's designed, therefore, to be easy to learn. Now, you might argue about how well the authors of the language actually accomplished that, because there are some tricky bits. And obviously it is a whole language, but the intent is that since everything is regular, there's no like irregular verbs, the grammar is perfectly defined, it's all in the book. The idea is that if you just learn the basic grammar forms and then drill vocabulary for a month, that you can speak it at a beginning level. So if you're looking to pick up another language, why not Lojban? Okay, so that's all the categories. Let me put in the rewrite rules for the capital letters. And then we'll see where that goes. So, The other interesting thing about this is that normally I can work in silence for a little time, but now I feel the need to keep monologuing, so you're just gonna have to put up with that. Okay, so that's kind of the basic we need. If we do this, now we see we get words like chicken, pipizisnuk. So okay, so there's obviously some things that we've already ruled out here that aren't permitted. Like for example, I have no idea why this pia pia was permitted because because it was I accidentally put palatalized things in the non-palatalized list. That's why. Oops. So we all make mistakes. Okay, and that is more reasonable because now we've got things like Czech, Tietin, Nipientipia, Nipientipa, Nipio. It's Pika Pika says, wow, this is going over my head. Had to research. Good. You're learning new things. Yeah, no, I'm doing this because I want to share it with everyone. And I'll encourage you, once again, if you have questions, if you think I'm going too fast, if you want to talk about a particular thing that languages do, let me know. Put it in the chat. If you've got longer form responses, my email is in the channel description. But okay, this looks like it's the beginning of stuff. Let me try to do the horribly embarrassing thing of reading this on camera for the next 15 minutes, and hopefully that will show us what issues there are and also get me more practiced saying this. Because you'll find when you first start creating a language, it's obviously you're making it. It's new. It's alien. It's not going to be easy at first, but if you just get used to it, you'll find that it's a lot easier over time. So okay. Hold on, is that is supposed to be unrounded? That's an A, but but unrounded, so that should be, or no, but rounded. Sorry, so that should be so the pentietin. Oh, okay, we've got another issue here. We've got double T's. It's Pika Pika asks, what's your end goal and how did you get into that stuff? Also, were you into software development before this? So, yeah, I mentioned this at the beginning, but I assume you've joined us since then, which is great. Just to go over the goals for the language again, we've got the whole goal of Let's Make a Language is to show you how my language creation process works, to show you how I research, to show you how I put things together, so that you can follow along and create your own language to add to your writing or just to baffle your friends with. Or you don't have to follow along. You can just let it wash over you. I really do think that it's more fun if you do some of this stuff yourself, though. So for end goal, we're making a language because I want to show you how much fun conlanging is. And to that end, there's a few different goals that we discussed earlier. So Twitch stores streams for a certain amount of time. If you have people who wanted to see this but missed it, I think you'll be able to see that on Twitch. I'm also recording it on my computer, and I plan to post it, but I haven't actually tried that yet, so let's hope it works, and then if it does work, I'll put links in the channel notes. Yeah, It's Pika Pika says, oh, okay, excellent. I assume that answered your question. Your other question, though, about whether I was into software development, yes, actually. I'm a working software engineer. I work at NetApp doing cloud technologies, and I have always had a big interest in computer languages as well. So, okay, what was I saying? We've got double T's in here. That's another thing that we probably want to use a rewrite rule for. Not that there's anything wrong with having double T's. Like, if we just had the word tietten, like, I can say that, tietten. I don't know. What do people think? Do you like those, like, double T's, like t or nina, or, even lala? Or is that something that we should not put in the language? Nick, Tuf, Pintitif, Pen, Kakatian. Okay. I don't know. The double letters, I'm really vacillating on whether I want to go for them. one thing that I did notice here, Sparrow of Doom says, let's keep the doubles for now. They're pretty, but hold open the option to limit them later. Yeah, that's a great point. There's also some languages will have double letters in their writing, but they won't say them. Or they'll say a completely different sound for them. Like, to drag up the example of the person with a Cockney accent saying bottle again, that's written B-O-T-T-L-E, but it's pronounced bottle. And that's just because in the Cockney accent, whenever you've got two hard stops like that up against each other, sometimes they turn into glottal stops. But even like English speakers who speak a more American dialect won't say like bottle. They'll say bottle, not bottle. It's Pika Pika says this is literally looking like some beatboxing pattern I used to do. Yeah, I mean, so speaking of beatboxing, there are languages that people have made that are actually designed to be sung instead of spoken. There's the most famous example of that is probably Sol Re Sol, or hold on, it's let me say the language name actually correctly. It's Sol Re Sol. And it was actually designed to be sung or played on the violin. It's a weird language. It's not the kind of language that you would speak naturalistically, but those things totally exist. Although there are even natural languages that incorporate pitch. Like, obviously there's things like Mandarin that have a tone system where ma and ma are different words. But there's also actually a language that's spoken on a tiny island off the western coast of Africa, and its name is escaping me, that was based on Spanish, but whistled, because it was designed to be heard between different mountain peaks. I say designed, it's a natural language. There are actually native speakers of it. And so it's a completely whistled language. There are none of the traditional consonants that we've been talking about. It's all... So yeah, you can get weird with language. Almost anything that you can think of is a thing that you can do with language, which is the other really fun part about conlanging, is it's really about your imagination and not about like following a prescribed format. It's Pika Pika says, yes, I watched a documentary on it, I remember. Yeah, excellent. I'm glad. People should know more about obscure languages, just because language is fun. So, okay. This has been an absolute pleasure. We're drawing in on 1 o'clock, which is when I said I would wrap everything up. So I'm just going to go through and reiterate a few things that we learned today, because that's a great way to sum things up, is tell people what you're going to tell them what you told them. So today we talked about, how glad I am to have you all here, what the scheduling is going to be, which is once every 2 weeks for about 2 hours, but I'm open to be flexible about that. So if you have feedback, go ahead and send me an email about it. We talked about why you would want to do a conlang, about how I think it's fun, about how it enhances your writing, about how there are conlangs for basically every purpose. And then we talked about how I go about making a language, including starting with goals so that you know what you're trying to do. And that can include having like a fictional group of people in mind to speak it, or it can include having a real world use case, like maybe you want to do something with your language. And then we talked about phonology, meaning what sounds go into a language and how those sounds interact with each other. And then we had a brief touch on phonotactics, which is how sounds are structured within syllables, what the rules for adjacent sounds are. It's Pika Pika says, wow, really glad to meet you, man. Looking forward to the streams. Absolutely. I can't wait to see you. So yeah, so that's what we've talked about. I will just say again that everything that I'm doing on this stream is going to be released under a Creative Commons Attribution license, which means if you want to use words or the whole language or anything that I've put on screen or my voice explaining things, go right ahead. Do whatever you want with it, modify it, share it, give it to your friends, sell it commercially. Just make sure that you leave my name on it. If you write an academic paper, make sure to cite me. If you write a book, put me somewhere in the acknowledgements or in the author's notes. Or if you're just following along and not using anything directly, but just using this process to make your own language, you don't need to do anything. It's your language. Go, do it. So yeah. Okay, I don't really think I have anything else to talk about. Sparrow of Doom says, thank you for all this coolness. I'm glad you've enjoyed it. Obviously, I have a lot of fun with conlanging. The whole point of this is to try to share it with you. So yeah, I think we're pretty much done. I'll stay here for a few more minutes in case people have any final questions. And then I'll close things up and see about getting recordings uploaded, and hopefully that works. I really can't wait to hear what people think of this, and I hope that you learned something about language today. Yeah. All right then. I can already tell that no one is going to ask me questions and that most of you are already leaving, because that's how these things work. But that's totally reasonable. Yeah, people who are watching this video later, because I don't intend to edit things down because editing sounds like a lot of work. I might later if I need to. But for those of you who are watching right now after everyone else who is watching live has left, I'll just stare at you for 6 minutes. No, I can't keep that up. Let's see, what is 2 weeks from now? 2 weeks from now is the 17th. Yeah, okay, so I'll have to update all of the channel stuff to say that our next episode's on the 17th. Grace says, do it without blinking. Gosh, I don't think that I can stare for 6 minutes without blinking. That is quite a challenge. I'm gonna say I'm not gonna do that one. But no, in all seriousness, this has been Let's Make a Language. Thank you so much for joining me. It's been a lot of fun. All right, that's the wrong button again. I have a stop streaming button. Here we go.